Hiking is life. With that being said, I'll mention there's a few places I won't go anymore. One of them is the Mount Hood area in Oregon. I know lots of people go there, and nothing crazy has happened to them. But when I went there, I experienced something that still has me shook. This happened back around 2015. It was summer and I was younger. I had been hiking up there before, but this time decided to go off trail and just explore the area. I got pretty deep into those woods and got turned around somehow. By the time I figured out which way to go and was back on the trail out of there, it was already dark. I had 3 miles to go till I was back to the turnoff where I'd parked. It was really late. Since it was summer, the sun set late, and by that time it was 10:30 or 11 at night. I only had my phone as a flashlight because I hadn't planned to be out there after dark. Nothing but night noises, crickets, owls, the usual, really spooky setting. My imagination had already come up with 100 ways I was going to die out there alone. Twigs snap somewhere off to my right. I shine my light in that direction and I don't see anything unusual. Rocks tumble off in the distance. I trip on a root. Then a bat swoops down, almost hitting me. My heart is racing now because these things aren't helping the anxiety that is building up in me while alone in the dark in the woods. I press on because there's nothing else I can do. Shadows from my light begin to look like phantoms. I'm seeing long-armed humanoids in my peripheral. I start to run, which makes the shadows go wild. Adrenaline is pumping non-stop now, and my mind is racing. I pass a large bush on my left, and not even 10 feet from it, hear loud rustling in the leaves, followed by a low growl. I turn, and my light reflects off of something's eyes. They're low to the ground. They're cat's eyes. I keep my light on them and slowly back away, while simultaneously reaching for the bear spray on my pack with my free hand. I already know what it is, and it's a mountain lion. I grab my bear spray and arm it. Not a moment later, the big cat comes crashing out of the brush. I release the spray while still walking backwards. The cougar gets a face full of high-grade pepper spray and begins yelling its head off. After a moment of it rubbing at its face, it turns and runs blindly off deeper into the woods. I take a second to catch my breath and figuratively change my pants. I then continue to run to my car and to safety. I know a cougar attack could happen almost anywhere deep in the woods, but I think the buildup of my imagination and an actual attack happening has just turned me off to that area in general. I've been hunting since I was 12 years old, and I'm 25 now. This was my first year bow hunting, however, and because of that, I ended up in a different spot than I had hunted before. My buddy, Charles, had been in the spot for years though, so I felt comfortable going with him. Second day out there, and I got a deer in a clearing in the woods. It was a good clean shot in the lungs, but as hunters know, sometimes even well-hit deer will run. It ran a good 100 yards deep into the woods, and my buddy and I tried to track it. The dense forest around us made it a bit difficult, but we finally found it. We had been out there all day, and there was no way we were going to drag or even carry the intact deer out the 5 miles we had hiked in, so we quartered it up, making it easier to carry. The sun was starting to go down, but we had enough time to make it back to the truck, or at least we should have, before it got fully dark. It was getting dusk and Charles was starting to get a little pissed. As long as we went east, we should have hit the road. It traveled the full length of the state land we were on. We were walking the opposite way of the setting sun, and we had a compass. It should have only taken us about 2 to 2.5 hours, but we were going on 3.5 hours of hiking. The night fully overtook us, and we continued to trudge through the dark. We brought headlamps with us at least, so that made things a bit easier. We were getting tired. Our water was all gone, and both of us were getting pretty hangry by this point. Then this is where the weird stuff started to happen. Through the trees, we saw a light shining back at us. We thought it was a flashlight from someone else, which kind of scared us. Who in the woods besides us would be walking around that late at night in the woods? But then it started to move quick and in an erratic motion. It darted between trees and went up into the air, taller than any person could. It bounced around like that for a good while, and my friend and I just stared in disbelief. Then it just vanished. We looked at each other in a kind of, "did you just see what I saw" kind of way. Eventually we shrugged it off and kept walking, hoping to hit the road or something at some point. Couldn't have been 5 minutes later that we saw the light again. This time it was more calm and almost seemed welcoming. Hard to explain, but it moved in a manner that almost seemed to be calling us to it. I think we were both so tired at that point that we followed it out of sheer hope. It was kind of like, well, if we die, we die. We took about 3 steps and then noticed that the sound of our footsteps had changed. It went from the soft crunch of leaves to the unmistakable sound of gravel. I looked left and then right and noticed we were standing on the road and not in the forest anymore. Neither of us noticed the change in scenery. It was almost like we walked through a portal and instantly we were on the road. I was shocked and stunned until Charles slapped me on the shoulder and pointed to his truck just a few feet from us. We both ran to the truck, dumped our gear in the bed, and then peeled out of there as fast as we could. We didn't stop talking about it the whole way home, and even nowadays still talk about it. The best we can come up with is that we were dehydrated or something and got lost somehow. What the light was, we still don't know, but maybe it was someone or something watching out for us. My house is way out of town, about 15 miles or so and surrounded by woods. I've lived out there for 20 years and never had a problem or experienced anything odd. A few weeks ago, I went for a hike in the forest. I've been through there a lot and know every inch of ground. It was like any other time I'd been out there. The pines were whispering in the wind, the birds were chirping. Everything seemed normal. There's a little clearing I like to go to out there. The field at that time of year is full of wildflowers, and there's a hill behind it that is tall enough to give an amazing view. 20 years out here, and I still can't get enough of seeing the field in bloom and the trees beyond. On the back side of the hill, the forest gets dense again, and after taking in the view, I decided to carry on to a little creek that's through those dense trees. I was halfway to the creek when I noticed some downed trees. That seemed odd. There hadn't been a windstorm or anything like that. I never noticed the trees were infected or sick, so why they would have fallen was beyond me. I went to go and check it out, and I noticed the trees weren't just fallen. They were chopped down and placed in a ring. In the middle of the ring was an odd rock formation, and for lack of a better description, it looked like an altar. While I was inspecting the trees, I noticed odd crude carvings in them. I've tried to look up the symbols as best I could, but nothing has come up. No words or anything that would be easier to look up. Only some weird symbols that looked like they had been carved using a knife by a 5-year-old. There was also a small fire pit by the rock formation, and I did find a couple of bones in it. They weren't human at least, because that would have really made me panic. I got out of there and went back to my house. I'm kind of scared because I live alone and I'm an older man about to be in my 60s. I wouldn't be as spry in a fight anymore if this turned out to be something serious. I don't know if some cult has moved in or what's going on. There aren't many houses out here, and I'm the closest one to the woods. The nearest road to that altar is about 4 miles away. I called the police and they checked it out. The bones were from a chicken, and they don't have a lead on the symbols either. All they did was knock down the altar and leave. I'm not going to be going for walks that deep into the woods anymore, and I put up floodlights around the house in case anyone comes snooping around. It's really ruined my feeling of peace around this land. I'm a fairly avid hiker. I go out at least once a month to get some time in the trees. Normally I go with a group of friends, which is the smart thing to do, but this one weekend, every one of my usual hiking buddies was busy, so I went by myself. I live in a small town and there's some state property half an hour away, so I went there thinking since it's closer it would be safer. Got there at 9 in the morning and set off for a day of hiking. There were no cars in the small parking lot, and I figured I had the place to myself. I had been to the area a couple of times, but didn't know it very well. Still, the trails are clearly marked and easy to follow. Got a few hours in and stopped for lunch. Was about to tear open my MRE package when I heard a loud commotion off the trail and further into the woods. It sounded like something was tearing through the brush at a fast pace. Then I heard a woman scream. Don't think I need to say that this scared the hell out of me. I pulled out my phone and yes, I still had service, so I ran into the woods in the direction of the scream to see if someone needed help. Ran for about 5 minutes and called out in case anyone would answer me. Came to an area where the dirt had clearly been disturbed. It looked like something big had run circles around the place. Checked around the area and found nothing else but a few strips of cloth, maybe off of a flannel shirt or something, but not really clear cut what it was. There was no blood or anything like that, and no tracks or footprints to follow from what I could see. I headed out of that area as fast as I could, and I was back home by 2 in the afternoon. I did call the police and made a vague report. There wasn't too much to say besides I heard a noise and found some cloth, but I figured I should say something in case someone came up missing or something like that. I don't think the police took me too seriously anyways. Never did hear about anyone going missing out there. I told my friends and they haven't heard anything either. It still scared me shitless. And I wonder what it was that happened out there that day that I heard. The first time I went camping, it was in high school. My friend's parents owned some property out by a lake in Washington State, on the border with Idaho. They hadn't done anything to it, so it was all woods with a little beach that we camped on. I will admit that we'd been smoking weed that night, but that still doesn't explain what happened. It was me, Jared, and another friend, Brett. We set up our tent and heated up some canned food over the fire. Afterwards, we were smoking and taking in the stars. I don't remember what was said, but we were laughing our asses off when Brett all of a sudden stopped and told us to be quiet. We were high and thought he was messing with us or tripping, so we continued to talk. Then we all heard it. It sounded like something big and heavy was crashing through the trees. Jared ran and grabbed his machete he brought with him, and I grabbed the axe we brought to chop wood. We huddled around with our backs to the fire. It sounded like something was tearing trees down out there, it was so loud. Then there was a loud, almost like a yell, but all garbled. Definitely didn't sound like any wild animal we knew of. Brett yelled back into the woods and all the noises stopped. We listened for 5 minutes or so and nothing. No frogs, no crickets, nothing. It was dead silent. Then we heard the loud walking sound again, only this time it was going away from us. No one slept that night, and in the morning we went to check to see if we could find anything out there. There was a clear trail where this thing had been. Weeds were stomped down, bushes looked like they had been walked through, and one tree even looked like it had been pushed over, but that could have happened before and we wouldn't have known it. There were a lot of trees that were bent and sideways out there, so it might not mean anything. Despite how big the thing sounded and appeared to be, judging by how the bushes were smashed, we didn't find any footprints. We followed the trail as best we could for a few hundred yards, but then it got into an area where the trees and plants were thinned out, and we couldn't find the trail anymore. You could say it was the overactive imagination of 3 high teenagers out in the woods alone at night. I know what I heard that night, and I know what I saw the next morning. I just have no clue what it was. When I was younger, my dad would take me camping. It was cool because we spent time together and got away from the rest of the family. There was one time when I was 12 that he took me out to the Appalachian Mountains in Pennsylvania. I don't remember exactly where we went. I just remember no one else was around us. We hiked all day way back into the woods. Honestly, I loved it. It was a huge adventure to me. A couple of hours before the sun went down, we made camp, ate, and all that stuff. Once it was dark, he played the guitar by the fire for a while, and I sang along. Anyways, later that night, I'm asleep, all warm in my sleeping bag, when I wake up to the sound of my dad rummaging around in the tent. Next, I hear him load and rack his pistol he always brought out when we went camping. Naturally, this alarmed me, and I bolted upright and asked what was wrong. I still remember the look in his eyes. They were as big as a plate, but he calmly told me nothing was wrong and to go back to bed. He was just going outside for a second to check on something. I was 12, and even though I could obviously see my dad was scared about something, I tried to do as I was told. Here's the thing about my dad. I had never seen him scared of anything before in my life. He was a real outdoorsman and normally stoic. I couldn't go back to sleep knowing that something had scared him because that scared me as well. 5 minutes go by. Could have been 2 or 10, I don't really know, but it wasn't that long. I watched his flashlight move around through the fabric of the tent. It kept getting further and further away until it was out of sight. 20 or so minutes go by without me knowing where he is, and then I hear his gun go off. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shots rang out through the dark forest night. Then everything went quiet again. I laid there with my sleeping bag pulled up to my nose, frightened out of my mind. It felt like forever until I finally saw his flashlight coming back. When he got back in, I asked him what happened. He just said, "Nothing, thought I saw a bear," and that was it. I know my dad wouldn't have been that scared of a bear or gone hunting one down for half an hour. I asked again one other time, and he acted like he didn't know what I was talking about. No clue what happened that night and what he saw and shot at, or if he even hit his target. I also don't know what it was that spooked him so bad, since I had been asleep and didn't experience whatever he had. Sadly, I can't even try to ask again, as he passed away last year. This happened about 18 years ago, and is still one of the scariest things I've ever experienced. When I was a teen, my friends and I would go ride quads on some dirt trails way out in the woods. There was a little spot that we would go mudding in if it had rained, or ride dirt bikes or quads out there when it was dry. I remember this one time we were out on the quads kicking up dirt and goofing off, just being dumb teenagers. Everything was fine and we were taking a break for a bit, roughhousing and whatnot. One of my friends, Jaden, had gotten me in a headlock when he suddenly stopped playing and let go. He then asked, "Who is that?" Me and the other 2 guys looked to where he was pointing. There was a dude, must have been around 6'2", standing at the tree line covered in mud and possibly blood, and only dressed in his underwear. He didn't do anything else but stand and stare at us. We were dumbfounded and no one moved for a good minute, until Kyle finally shouts out to the man asking if he needed help. The guy doesn't respond at all, so we all hop on our quads to go see if he needed help or something. As we get closer, the guy does this weird stutter movement. It was like he was trying to get his legs coordinated with his body or something, and then he begins to bolt out of there. He was moving fast, faster than we would have expected. He was gone before we made it to where he was. We all stop, but Kyle kept going into the woods. We waited for him for a bit to see if he would come back. When he didn't, we went to look for him. Found him about 20 minutes later kicking his rolled over quad. He had tried to go up a slope and hit a log that off-balanced him. Fortunately, he wasn't hurt, just mad. He said he followed the guy up until that point, but couldn't catch him. He had gotten a better look at the guy and said he was super thin enough to see his ribs, and he was covered in mud and had twigs in his hair. We never did catch the guy and never saw him around there again. I was 20 when this happened. I'm 25 now. It was the spring of my junior year in college. My then boyfriend and I decided to go camping to be away from our roommates and to have some alone time. Found a cool spot in upstate New York to spend the weekend in a tent with no one else around. I had never been camping like this before. It had always been at a campsite, not in the backwoods. So I was a little uneasy the first night, not having a soul around, but it went well enough, and soon I was more comfortable with it. The second day, I don't think we even left the tent. We were young and, well, you know. It was around 3 in the afternoon when we heard some people talking very loud a good ways off. It sounded like a heated argument and it was coming closer. We threw on our clothes in case anyone came by and then sat there staring at each other. At first, we couldn't make out what was being said, but it eventually grew louder, and we heard the words where and money. Next, it sounded like someone took a raw piece of meat and slapped it hard. After that, there was a loud thud and some grunting. Neither of us moved a muscle. The arguing went quiet, and I swear we didn't even breathe for the next half an hour. Eventually, my boyfriend got up and started to pack. We tore down the tent and hiked all the way back to the car. It got dark, but we kept going until we made it, and then drove to the nearest hotel we could find to spend the night there, before going back to our apartments the next day. I do a lot of rock climbing to stay in shape and because it's fun. Sometimes I can't make it all the way out to a mountain to climb, so on those days I go to a place I know and do some bouldering to practice and improve my strength. This happened during one of those times. The place I know to boulder is about 8 miles back in some woods near my house. It's a relatively easy hike on flat ground, with a dense forest all around it. There's a game trail that leads all the way to a rock face that is about 25 feet high. It's perfect for this kind of stuff. I get out there about 10 in the morning, do runs up and down the rock, taking breaks periodically, and leave in the afternoon. A mile into my walk back, and I get the feeling that something is watching me. I'm not normally an anxious or paranoid person, but the feeling came on me suddenly. I even stopped and looked around because something just felt out of place. Out of nowhere, I got the chills and the air felt colder than it had, but I would say it felt like the temperature took a 20-degree plunge in a matter of seconds. The hair on the back of my neck stood straight up and all my senses were heightened. I caught some movement out of the corner of my eye and whipped my head around to see what it was. It was hard to get a good look at it through all the trees, but it was white. I'm talking as white as a piece of paper. It almost looked human, but was walking on all fours, with limbs much too long for its body. Unfortunately, I didn't get a better look at it than that. It went between a few more trees, and then I lost sight of it. Once it was gone, everything went back to normal, and the day was warm again. It took me a long while to process what I had seen. I've been trying to figure it out, and in my search, the thing that best fits it would be a crawler or a rake. None of the animals I've seen have been close. It was too skinny to have been a bear or an albino bear, and it didn't have any fur on it. I don't think it was a wolf either, again because it lacked any fur. Maybe some kind of sick animal that had the mange really bad or something, but I don't think it was that either. The feeling of being watched and the temperature change, I can't explain as well. If anyone has any idea of what it could have been, let me know. Probably not that scary, but here we go. My friend and I lived out in the country in northern Idaho back in the late 90s. The houses were pretty far from each other, and there was this old country store we used to go to get snacks and junk food. Behind the store was a stretch of woods that we would go and play in almost every day. Further back in the woods was a rock plateau that you could walk up and see all the houses in the area. It was pretty cool for a couple of 14-year-old boys who didn't have girlfriends or anything to worry about. We rode our bikes to the store after school one day and got some snacks and whatnot, then decided to head back into the forest to goof off and be loud. We would find sticks and sword fight, horse around, and generally be rambunctious boys. We goofed off all the way up to the plateau and took in the view while we finished our snacks. Until then, we had never gone past that point, but this day we decided to see what was on the other side of the hill. The woods got incredibly thick back there, lots of trees, low-hanging limbs, and brush to push through. We came to this little pond back there that had a shack on the other side of it. Being dumb kids, we decided to go check it out. As we get closer, it starts to smell bad, kind of like cat piss, but more acrid. There was one window on the far side of the cabin that we noticed when we did a walk around. We looked in the window and it looked like a chemistry lab. Cool, we thought. It's the hideout of a mad scientist. And like I said, we were kinda dumb. We tried to open the door, but it was locked. We then tried to see if any of the boards were loose so we could get in. This thing was literally a shack. There wasn't any siding on it. It was just slab boards and some crude framing with a plywood roof. After 2 minutes of trying, we hear someone walking through the forest and book it out of there all the way back to the store. We didn't want the mad scientist to get us and do weird experiments on us. Well, about 3 months later, our parents said we couldn't go back in those woods anymore. We heard around school that the police had found a meth lab out there. I'm very glad we didn't find a way into that shack, because those chemicals can be deadly. I'm also glad that whoever we heard walking through the woods didn't find us or come after us. I probably wouldn't be here telling this story if they had.